In this video, I want to show you how to use the Python programming language to read in a data file you might encounter during a programming competition. I'm going to read it in a particular way. I'm going to read it in line by line by line, capturing each line as a standalone string. Now that may not seem applicable to any particular programming competition problem you've encountered, but it's very likely to be useful in any programming competition problem. Once you have gotten done with the file I/O and you just have string data to work with, you can manipulate it however you like, and the file I/O part is out of the way. At least that's the way I'm going to approach it for this. Now, the second thing I'm going to do in this video is show you how to identify the file that we're going to use using command line arguments. That is to say, when we run our program, our Python script, I want to provide a command line argument to it that identifies which file we want to use as input. This way, I don't have to open up the source and change it every time I want to try to use a new file. So let's get started and take a peek at the data file I've prepared. So this data file is a little unusual. Very often, programming competition data files are just series of numbers or basic strings, line after line after line, in a very compact form, trivial format. This one is a little bit more interesting, just to give us a reason to want to be able to read things in, say, line by line, rather than trying to just grab the next integer and the next integer. So if you look at this file, there are lines that have two numbers on them. Now, the made-up problem this is associated with is something trivial, like for every line of data where there are two numbers, add up those two numbers and print out the result, print out the sum. Very simple. But other lines, to give me the chance as a judge to develop an input file that has some structure to it that I can remember or follow as the judge, you can see I have blank lines. That gives me that capability, much like the blank lines and vertical whitespace we use when we write code. The third type of line that's in this input file starts with a pound symbol, and they're meant to represent comments. So a judge like me could prepare a file where I use comments to describe things. So the comment at the bottom of this file identifies that the remainder of the data lines represent pairs of numbers that should add up to 5 when they are summed. So that's the kind of file we are going to deal with. Now, I'm not actually going to write the program that separates out the blank lines from the comments and the data lines in this video. I'm just going to show us how to read in each of those lines and then verify that we did it correctly. So let's write some code. To start, I'm going to create a new Python script that I'll just call program.py, for lack of a better name. And because I'm going to use command line arguments, I need to import the system module. So import sys. And the first thing that I'm going to do actually deals with those command line arguments. So I'm going to capture all the lines, not lies, the lines as we talked about. I'm going to grab them from a file that I'll open. So I'm going to open up a file, and that file will be identified through the argument vector, the first element of it. So the argument vector is just an array of strings, or a list of strings in this case with Python, that comes from the Python interpreter when we run it on our particular script. So if you think about when you, say, compile something with GCC, you might type GCC space main.c or program.c. So the name of that compiler is actually a string in the list of things that you type, and it's the first one you typed, but because everything in computer science is base 0, or it very often is, it's considered to be the 0th element of the argument vector. The next thing you type is the first argument of the argument vector. It's in position 1, so it's position 1, but it's really the second thing we type. And in our simplistic example, that's the way we're going to do things here too. So we're going to this argument vector, which is accessible through sys.argv, and it's a list, and we go to the 1th element, or index 1, and that will be the file name that was passed to this program as a command line argument. So now that we have that file, we need to we need to read the contents of it. So I'm just going to take the file object that comes out of the open call and read it. That's going to give me one super giant string, nothing like a list of strings based on each line. So it's not quite what I want, but it is a good start. Luckily, Python has a very nice function ready to go to help me with these things. So when I get a large string, I can actually break that string up into a list of smaller strings based on some kind of delimiter. In this case, what I'm going to do is split the string up based on the new line character. That's going to start at the beginning of the file, start capturing a string until we hit a new line, stop, take that first string and make it the 0th element of our list. Then we'll move on to the next line and make that the 1th element of the list, or index 1, and so on. So oddly, at least in Python, this is sort of it. The trouble is, we want to make sure that we did it right. So I'm going to go ahead and echo the file back out line by line. And if I just did a simplistic loop where I took each line in this list I've created called lines, and I just printed them out one after another, it probably will look like the file, but it won't be clear to me that I really separated the file by new lines, because maybe I really just got one giant string, and so printing it out looks like a bunch of lines because the file itself was a bunch of lines. So we're going to go ahead and put in a simple loop that prints out each of the lines, but will print out a line number with it. That way we have a clearer indicator of where we interpreted each string to begin and end. So what I'm going to do is iterate using the for loop, counting line numbers. So I'm going to create a variable here on the fly called line number. I'm going to go through line numbers as well as lines in these files, but I'm going to call each one of them line for the sake of this. And those are going to come from two lists. One is the list of lines. That'll be the one I put on the right. And the other will be a list of line numbers, which will be based on counting from 0 up to 1 minus the number of lines, or the number of strings in the lines list. All right, so let's get that going. And if I'm going to iterate through two lists in Python, I have to zip them together. So the first one relates to line numbers. So it's going to be a range list generated based on the length of the lines list. So if there are 5 lines in the file, the length of lines will be 5. This range function will make us go through the numbers 0 through 5 minus 1, 0 through 4. So internally, if I want to print line number 1, I have to remember to add 1 to it. So that gives us the line numbers to iterate through. Now we actually want to get those strings as well, so that will come from the list that we've already called lines. It's the list of all the lines in the file. Very simple. So now we'll print them out. So I'm going to print them out, and I want to make sure that when I'm printing them out, that the line numbers, which I'll print first, are kind of right justified. So they all line up, even if those numbers are 1 digit, or they're 2 digits, or they're 3 digits, right? I want them sort of growing off toward the left to make my output nice and clean. So I'm going to do that with a little bit of formatted I/O. So let me provide that information here. So I'm going to print from the left edge to 8 characters, and I'll be printing a decimal value here, or integer value. And so I'll take that format string, and what I'll format is the line number. Now that line number is going to go through a range that goes from 0 to the number of lines minus 1. So I'm going to add 1 to it here so that all my line numbers start at 1. Then I'll print out a colon with a couple spaces, and after that I'll print the line itself. That seems fairly reasonable. So let's see if it works. I'll go over here to my terminal, and I'm going to be able to just say Python 3, the name of my script, program.py, and we'll print out the input file. Hopefully this works. Yes, it works, it works. Okay, so you can see very clearly that we did in fact read in the list of lines broken up by the original carriage returns, because each item of the list that we called lines is preceded by a line number, in this case 1 through 14. You also notice the blank line at the end of the file because my editor, when I save, puts in an extra carriage return. But that is basically it. So what's important to note here is that really the entirety of reading this file in line by line into a list of individual strings representing each line is done just by this single line of code here, line 3. And so with Python, that's basically all you have to do. Good luck and have fun.